Well, good morning. I'm Ken Bibrai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, Republicans in the House are on their fourth choice for Speaker, Mike Johnson from Louisiana. Arizona Diamondbacks are heading to the World Series against Texas Rangers. And today's topic is the power of now. And we're joined by Erin Coupe, founder of Authentically EC Inc. Great to see you, Erin.
You too, Kenan. Thanks for having me.
And I'm sure everybody watching is just, they're not shocked at all that I would have a conversation about mindfulness and being present and the power of now, right? This is an obvious, topic for me as an over-caffeinated, high energy, you know, talker. So why are we here, Erin? What are you focused on? Why should we be paying attention to the power of now?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think if we look back at what we've lived through, people have really started to realize that there's real value in assessing how they're going about navigating their daily existence, right? Their life. And the way that we used to live, which was just kind of everything is about work and then how do we fit everything else in, has changed, right? We still work very hard, but what we're now really focused on is how can we start to integrate work and our life, meaning family, friends, personal health and well-being, so that everything feels like it's more of a consistent existence, that we're not struggling or battling with ourselves day in, day out on how do we achieve more, how do we chase that, how do we feel this way, how do we not feel that way, and really just have a more conscious lifestyle.
Yeah. So it's funny. So you come from not this background per se, right? Like you come from a corporate background, right? Like Goldman, CBRE. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory. Like when was that aha moment for you that you were kind of like, we can't exist as just cogs in a machine? Like when did
Yeah. Well, I love this question because I feel like every time I talk about this with people, everyone can relate to it, within context, of course. But so for me, yeah, I spent, my 20s on Wall Street at Goldman. A couple years prior to that, I was at Thomson Reuters. And I then went into commercial real estate at 30 years old and then spent several years at CBRE. Now, the real pivotal moment for me is I resigned from Wall Street at 30 because I literally did burn out. Like I was at that point that, I had done all the things that people in New York did at that time, which was you work 14-hour days, then you party it off because it's really stressful, and then you go to therapy once a week. And for me, that was just it was never moving the needle in the direction that I felt like I needed it to go. And so I burned the candle at both ends and eventually realized, gosh, like nothing feels right. It's not even that I wasn't fulfilled. I mean, at 30, it's kind of like, you're not totally in that. I wasn't building a family or anything yet. So you're not in that kind of mindset where you need fulfillment. I was working hard, but I felt like I was literally my own worst enemy every day. Like the anxiety and the stress was perpetuated in my mind, but I didn't have a way to manage that. And it did physiologically start to present symptoms. I would faint fairly often. I would have these unexplainable rashes that couldn't be treated with anything but steroids. Like weird stuff was happening to someone who was otherwise very healthy and pretty holistic in nature. So fast forward, after becoming a mother, my two boys are about a year apart. That was in my mid 30s, and I was at CB as an executive there. I had this wake up call, and I kid you not, I feel like a lot of us get those knocks on the door.
Yeah.
It's like something is saying to us, you need to look deeper, or you need to look inward, or you need to reflect. And many times we don't listen to that. It's a real quiet voice. It's not the voice in our heads. It's the voice of our intuition, right? It's a quieter voice. And it's easy to just kind of knock it off like, oh, that was just some random thought. So for me, I literally heard this voice and I spoke the words out loud. And it was, what does this all mean? It was reflecting right then and there in the present moment from my heart on why do we believe the things we believe in our society. And from then on, my whole life started to shift because my choices were starting to shift. And I was taking more responsibility for the way that I was showing up every day.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about that mind kind of trap. Like my wife and I always talk about it with our boys, right? Like you're in a mind trap. Like it is just how much of this is self-induced that you're just kind of setting up you're your own worst enemy sometimes, and you just kind of like either tune it out or
Yeah.
bury it, or just like you let the other voices in your head kind of direct you. I mean, talk about
Absolutely.
that kind of internal struggle. I mean, it's
Yeah, I know. It's like the devil on one side, the angel on the other, right? And I call it the battle of the head and the heart. They don't say
uh,
listen to your head, they say listen to your heart. But what do we all do? Just listen to the critical voice in our heads. I'm a big basketball fan. My husband played college ball, my boys both play ball. And I've always loved the sport. And Michael Jordan, his biggest differentiator, and he always said this, it is not, he didn't become the GOAT, and it is not the fact that he was just the most talented person. It was the fact that he's always present. He didn't allow the voice in his head to scare him or keep him in a fear-based mindset of what if the shot doesn't go in. He didn't think that way. He just didn't allow those thoughts to be there. And that is actually the ability that we all have. And we're not necessarily taught that, right? Like we have these sort of wounded egos or these versions of ourselves in our mind that we think we are, and we believe them, right? And we base a lot of our decisions and a lot of our emotions attached to those fears in our mind: fear of failure, fear of not being enough, fear of not being liked, fear of not being loved, like all of these things. And everyone, this is part of the human condition. Everyone has these. There's no one unscathed, right? If you're human, you've got this. So being able to separate yourself or detach yourself from that voice that says those things to you is a really important human skill. In fact, I would say it's the most important human skill, because there's no way that you face fears and embrace them and overcome them until you first acknowledge that they're there and acknowledge that that voice is driving the fears and driving your decisions and driving ultimately your behaviors.
so you made this pivot, and this is what you're doing now. You're speaking to large companies, you're in workshops, and so on. But you're not coming at it per se from an academic experience, right? Like, talk a little bit more about just kind of how you're approaching this, like how you're articulating it, gathering the data, and kind of communicating, your toolkit, right? Like, where's it
Absolutely.
coming from? Yeah.
Well, when I first had that pivotal sort of awakening moment, and I felt like there was this new level of personal responsibility within me. If I wanted to be a better mom, a better partner, a better leader, a better person to myself and treat myself better, then I needed to do something different. You don't fix the same problems with the same way of thinking. And that is 100% always true.
Mm.
And so I first started to look at, well, geez, maybe there is something that will sort of scratch that itch of development and growth that I'm looking for. And I didn't know exactly what I was seeking. I was in a discovery phase of trying to figure out, what am I seeking? So I looked internally at the time I was at CBRE. I had done over the years every leadership development program you can imagine. I had done the Enneagram and Strength Finders and, Myers-Briggs and DISC and all of those. This wasn't about personality. My personality was fine. It was based on my ego, but it was fine. This was about some really deep inner work,
Yeah.
right? This was about some healing and some transformation and ultimately shifting my entire mindset. So looked in corporate, didn't find it. Then I looked in academia because I thought, geez, this is just this is the cloth I'm cut from, right? You go here, you look there, and you look there. Didn't find anything that scratched the itch there either. So then I realized, geez, I'm going to go some non-conventional places. And the moment I started looking in those places, I just felt like it couldn't have been more right.
Yeah.
So these are things like, I started studying Reiki, which is, essentially energy healing. We have a human energy system, right? So I started studying that. And to this day, I still practice that. I mainly just practice on myself and my family, right? But that is a big skill that is very non-conventional, but is really helpful in what I do. I started going to conferences and summits with quantum mechanics and quantum physics scientists and neuroscientists. And so these are people like Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and some of their work and studying their work. I also did things like it took a neuroscience course on business and leadership at MIT. And that was really giving me a lot of the science behind the stuff that I already knew is real and that works, but it was giving me the why, right? From an actual biological and physiological standpoint. So yeah, so that's just some of what I started to do, but all non-conventional, and then really putting all of this together as a toolkit. There was a lot I learned along the way that was no good, right? And so I practiced everything that I learned and I applied everything I learned. And if I felt like it wasn't working, then I'm like, there's no reason to move forward with that. So what I now teach is all the stuff that works.
Interesting. So much of this is also just like about you as an individual, right? Like
Yeah.
it's easy to kind of blame your company, blame your partner, blame your kids, blame, right? Like, and how much of it is about personal responsibility or accountability, and then how do you then transition from that to being authentic, right? Like, I kind of almost think like the authenticity part of it comes after the kind of accountability part, almost. Like, how do you, yeah,
Yeah.
walk me through that?
Oh, you're so right. I mean, I used to think I was authentic,
Yeah,
but then, I mean, I'd be contrived in certain conversations,
yeah,
or I'd purposely hold back in certain conversations, or I would try to steer someone's opinion. I mean, that's not being authentic, right? There's non-congruency between your thoughts and your words. And that is the definition right there of inauthenticity, right?
yeah.
Of being disingenuine. And we sense that as human beings. That's why you feel like, don't feel great about that person, or I don't relate to them as much, because you can tell that there is the non-congruency. So it all does start with personal responsibility. And you, of course, that is roped in with accountability.
Yeah.
Once you take responsibility for yourself and you realize it is your thoughts and it is your emotions that are directing your behavior. We are not creatures of logic. We are creatures of emotion. And when you realize that, only you can then do something about it. And that's where you stop pointing the fingers out and you point them in, right? You want to change something in your organization, you want to change something in your reality, in your personal life, you have to change you first,
Mm.
right? Don't get this confused with we all need to be fixed or we're broken. It's not that, but it's that there's so much we don't know about ourselves because we were never taught to look inward. We were never taught to work on the inner self. We were never taught that there is more to us than just our minds.
Sure.
And that's the really important part for people to understand, and then be accountable to the practices that you start to pick up. When I do workshops, speaking engagements, anything I do, there are actionable tools and insights, and people can start practicing now. And I always say, being mindful is not anything more than making better use of your time. You're already in your mind, right? You're always there. You have 65,000 thoughts a day on average. So
Wow.
if you're always there, how can you use your time there more wisely?
Mm. So talk a little bit about that, some of the tips and tools like in practice, and how much of it is kind of, your mind and your body versus also like staying up late, eating bad, partying, drink, right? Like how much of it is also the kind of external stuff we all kind of do, too much coffee, like, that, how much
Yeah,
of your conversation is kind of like you and kind of being authentic to yourself, but then also like maybe getting better habits and practices in general, right? Like,
yeah.
so that's part of it.
So my tagline is that your well-being is a reflection of your mindset. They are correlated
Mm.
and they speak back and forth. I mean, they are not separate things. And so absolutely a part of your well-being is your physical body,
Yeah.
right? And how you treat your physical body. And I talk about this in a form of how are you nourishing and nurturing your whole self? So it's not just about, okay, I nourish myself with, high quality water. I drink 100 ounces a day, which I do. I eat healthy, 90% of the time. I oxygenate my body by, breathing deeply and reminding myself to do that, and by exercising, definitely walking, being in nature, and then getting good sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Those are all really important factors. But then there's also nourishing and nurturing your inner self, your
Yeah.
soul, your spirit, right? Like these are parts of you that otherwise get neglected. And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and go, my life is a mess, or it doesn't feel good, or I never feel good. Well, because there's a part of you that is begging for your attention that you're not giving attention to. And that's the real factor. So some of the things that people can do, I mean, right away, one of the ones I love to sort of name that voice in the head, it's literally, mine is Erica, but give that voice a name, because it's not who you are. It is just this inner critic.
Mm.
So huge actionable insight right there that anyone can start to apply starting now. And when you name the voice, you distance yourself a little bit from it. So it can start to feel different when you're listening to your inner critic who's judging you, who's criticizing you, who's saying mean things to you, right? Things that you would never say to your
Yeah.
best friend or to your child or your partner. But yet you listen to that stuff. So distance yourself from it by giving it a name. For example, mine, Erica, like when she speaks up and she's loud, she gets really annoying, and I have to tell her to take a seat. Now, I didn't always have that skill. I used to only listen to her, and she used to lead me in every engagement, every interaction. Do you think I would do the work I now do in the world if I still listen to that?
Yeah.
No. Does she still, every time before I go on a stage or start a facilitation, does she, say, don't bomb it and some mean things? Of course she does.
I mean, I'm just thinking of like, we watched Luca over the summer and it was like Silencio Bruno. And it's just like, just silence that thing in your head and then like move on. So that's the only thing that pops up.
Exactly.
So much of this is about individuals, but a lot of the folks you speak to are companies and workshops, right? Like, so how do you take this kind of conversation about individuals and then kind of extrapolate it to like organizations, corporations, broader success? And why does it matter, right? Like,
yeah. So for one, I have definitely noticed that 2023 has been a huge year of people understanding that mindset matters. It really is everything to do with performance. So when you think about organizations, and let me just sort of talk about leadership right now, you think about leaders and people who may or may not trust one another at a leadership level, people who don't know how to be open and transparent with one another, and they're leading an organization, they're leading large teams. If you think about at a leadership level, people not fully showing up or knowing how they're showing up and just sort of living their lives in survival mode and on autopilot and reporting to someone who is like that, the way that that feels is what equals culture in an organization. Okay. So culture is, what does it feel like to work for that leader? And that's sort of the microculture. And then what does it feel like to work for the company? And that's the overall culture of the company, regardless of the words on the website, right? They can sound beautiful, but if it is not actually breathed and lived every single day, then it doesn't matter. So helping people understand themselves more fully so that they can show up more whole is a huge part of this. They can be more authentic. They can be more mindful. They can make conscious choices on how they are leading themselves and lead themselves well so that they can then give this to others. You can't give what you don't give yourself. You can't offer others compassion if you don't give yourself compassion.
So then how do you do this in a workshop versus speeches, right? Like, I feel like so much of it is pretty hands-on for you, right?
It is, yeah. So, if I do a speech, if I'm doing a keynote, for example, at a conference, what I always like to do is to take people on a journey, right? So let's just say I pick 3 themes, with the organization I'm working with. There's 3 themes. There's authenticity and mindfulness and resilience. And we're going to focus on those 3 themes. These things are not separate from one another, right? So they're not technical in nature where you say, okay, and now we're moving on to this. It flows really nicely because all of this is a part of what it means to be human. It's this human element that everyone can relate to. And so within each of those, there are stories, there's a journey that people go on through that speech. And then there are actionable tools that I teach. I gave you an ego example, right? But that may or may not be one that I teach in that particular keynote. But then everyone has maybe 1 to 3 things that they can start to apply right away. And I always say, take what resonates, leave the rest. For some people it's 1, for some it's all 3. It just depends. So that's the speech component. There's a real inspirational aspect to that, right? It's inspiring, it's motivating, it's energizing. And that's a lot of the feedback that I get. In a workshop setting, you're having people do things that are, for example, focus on what fear or limiting belief really drives your behavior. What shows up for you most often when you're listening to that voice in your head, and help them understand that. And I always use these 6-word stories, which is a Stanford Business School practice. I didn't go there, but I took some classes where I was, kind of a part of that. And when you create a 6-word story about this big fear that has been very prevalent for you, it allows you to sort of exercise your right brain, which a lot of us in the professional world aren't doing very often. So it's really fun and engaging in a workshop to do that. And then you have people create their growth statement. So what is a statement that you're moving towards? The you that you're becoming, the you that you are, but you're not being yet. And it's cool because you see the dichotomy of this fear-based scarcity mindset limiting belief. And then you see this growth, sort of heart-based, more intuitive statement of who they actually want to become or where they're headed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So a lot of your work started like our coffee talk during the pandemic, really on Zoom. We've started doing more in person. I think you're out there more. What's the difference? Like, talk about like the energy when you're physically there versus,
Yeah.
these are great and it's fun to do this, and you're in Chicago and I'm in DC and whatever, but like,
Yeah.
just like what's the power of being present in
Yeah.
person? And
Oh, totally.
and then segue that into just like your thoughts on energy in general. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, first, yeah. So I was doing this work for about a year on the side of when I was at CBRE. So I resigned in January of 2020 and sort of hit play in February on what I had built. I had already kind of tested it.
Sure.
And this is before the pandemic, and I
Yeah,
tested
February
it, and I
20.
knew that if I was onto something. I also, of course, knew because of the transformation in myself. So I knew the stuff works. But when I launched, of course, I had no clue that this pandemic was going to happen. I had no intentions of having an online business whatsoever. So the 3 clients that I had signed on for in-person work, which was, these leadership development type of programs, quickly kind of went by the wayside because we all thought the world was ending in March of 2020. So when I transitioned to an online business and I started doing workshops and speaking engagements on Zoom, one thing I realized right away is I do not do webinars for more than 100 people because I can't see faces, right?
Yeah.
The way that Zoom was set up, it was like if there's 5,000 people at the company on the screen, I have no clue. So I'm basically just talking to a dead computer.
Literally.
That was a hard no for me. I'm like, not all money is good money. And I will no longer do those, right? So that was a big learning experience in the first 6 months. As time has gone on and we've moved out of, that state of pandemic and people are coming together more in person, if there is an option to even do hybrid where it could be 10 people in a room and 100 people online, that is fine. I will do that all day long because being with people and being literally in other people's energy fields allows me as the facilitator or the speaker to gauge what is landing and how it's landing and to feel the excitement or the enthusiasm or maybe the fear, and to really, I'm an empath, to really feel that, which is we all have these elements to us to really understand the energy we're working with. But that is so important on how I continue forward in my engagement. I've got content that is a guide, but I am not, a lot of what I'm doing is just I'm guiding from my heart and speaking from my heart. So
and reacting probably to who's
and
there.
reacting to the energy, right? And I can't feel that on Zoom because on Zoom, a lot of people, I was in an engagement yesterday with almost 100 people, and the faces, like some are lit up, and some seem excited, and some I'm kind of like, are they even paying attention? You never know on Zoom, right? So yeah, all day long, if we can be in the presence of others, now that does have its pitfalls at times too, but think about it. If you don't feel good in the presence of someone else and their energy, you have information. You now know that maybe that's not the right person, for you to spend time around. You can intentionally choose who you spend time around, right? That's really important. Yes, we are in each other's energy when we're on Zoom or when we're on a phone call. That's definitely the case, but it's not felt as strongly than when you're actually in their presence.
So you have a real estate background. You've worked in corporate America. Like now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, a lot of what we do at Savills is helping people think about like the future of work and how do you get people back and how do you build culture, right? Like, how do you think about now work and real estate and offices and companies and culture, right? Like a lot of our conversations now, because of my colleague Wendy, we call her Wellness with Wendy because she's like every building is biophilia and light, right? Like it's like it kind of does, right? Like, so how important is the future of work? Like, do you spend time thinking about the future of work and how our work environment either helps or hinders our ability to be authentic and mindful and present as well? And then the energy impact,
I do, and I'm having conversations with several, owners or, I would say more so like landlord groups that have big portfolios about how to offer content that engages people in a particular building. right?
Is this
So
going to get worse out there probably with, and you know this better than most
exactly,
of my guests in terms of like vacancy and office buildings that are not going to get used or
right,
dilapidated and old and
totally.
nobody
And
should go to.
I mean, one thing, if I consider my own experience, when I was kind of going through my transformation, this journey,
Yeah.
right? As I was shifting and I was raising my own consciousness, right? Like, it's not that I was becoming better than anybody else. It was that my choices were now different.
Mhm.
And so, for example, office place gossip, I no longer would engage in it. Whereas before I jump right in,
Yeah.
you know? So I was doing what I call surf above the noise rather than be part of the noise. And
Correct.
there is a huge difference. Like,
Yeah.
you are showing up so different, and the way that you're affected in that environment is so different. So as I was shifting, I realized I can't spend as much time around these people.
Sure.
And I couldn't stereotype everybody. There were some people that I loved spending time
Of
around.
course. Yeah.
But for the most part, I needed to spend less time around those people because I didn't want to be in the vicinity of them. So
Yeah.
I also chose to work. I worked at coffee shops. I was working at home 2 days a week before it was a thing.
Yeah.
I was making those conscious choices to empower myself and to stay in my own energy and stay grounded. Because otherwise I could get knocked off course pretty
Sure.
easily. We all can, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about an office being a container, it's a container. It's four walls and it contains people, and it contains them for what reason? Well, what we now know and we're focused on the future of work is to collaborate, to ideate, to innovate, right? To be creative and to communicate clearly and to form relationships and deepen trust. Like, that's why we need to be together. That is the whole point. It is
Yeah.
not to manage someone's workload.
Sure.
It is and so it's really shifting out of what was this boomer authoritative leadership mentality
Yeah.
into this more collaborative, sort of circular, we're all in this together mentality. And that's going to take time. It's just going to take time. There's no way
Yeah.
to arrive there. I sort of look at it like we were on one side of the bridge and we know we need to get to the other side, because it's almost like going from like hell to heaven or something. It's
Yeah.
like
It's
it's
a
dark on
journey.
one side, it's light on the
Yeah.
other. And we're still on that left side of the bridge. We've
Yeah.
got a way to go before we're on that other side.
Yeah.
Offering tenants and offering your companies things that are different. So not necessarily physical space, because I think a lot of the spaces are beautifully designed these days and have a lot of optionality, but it's offering them different types of development. For example, some of the stuff we're talking about, it's offering them new ways of coming together and saying, hey, maybe it's, here's a gift card for the coffee shop in our
Yeah.
building. Why don't you take a colleague a week for a coffee? That kind of thing. And also purposely coming together to build relationships.
Yeah.
I don't think the landlords can change that. I think it's up to the leadership at the organizations to change it.
Totally. Yeah. No. And look, before I let you go, you mentioned kind of getting off course, right? Like, this stuff's not easy, right? Like, talk about like day to day consistency of kind of staying on track, like not deviating, triggers, right? Like, you can wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to be on track, and then you get a bad call, something happens on a deal, something happens with your kids, your spouse, right? Like, just talk about like trying to, how hard is it? How do you
Yeah.
implement, systems to stay on track and kind of
So
focus?
I think what makes it the hardest is the perpetuated stress or anxiety in our own minds. And we talked a
Yeah.
little bit about this, but if something comes in that is a stressor or a trigger, you have now got information to make a choice. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. They think they're a victim to what just occurred. You're not a victim to it. You have a choice in how you respond. A very, very quick story. I'm going to really shorten
Yeah.
this one. When I was in real estate, I did a very small deal for a friend of a friend, satellite office in Chicago, way smaller than I usually work on, but it was a fast deal. It got him a great, it was 3,000 square feet. It was like, no problem, bang this one out. No big deal. So there's two people involved: chief legal counsel, the head of sales. That's it. Day before lease is supposed to be signed. Landlord is expecting it that next day on Friday. Someone, chief people officer, Thursday night at 9 o'clock, sends a barrage of questions. I stay up late, respond, all the answers. Next day, long and short of it is 4 o'clock on that Friday, I get an email from this woman that says, not only do I not like this deal, I don't like you. I won't be signing this. And I am thinking, what the actual, you know what.
Yeah.
It never happened to me. And I am feeling every single emotion that is negative that's in the book, right? Like
Erica showed up, huh?
oh, I mean, I was like, no, prior to some of the practices that I had at that point, I would have responded in a very diplomatic and snarky way. You know, I would have gotten my dig in there, but it would have been professional. Instead, at this point, I asked my husband to please take the kids. I needed 30 minutes to ground myself and get centered to choose a response. And I responded, well, this is the first time this has happened to me in my career. I understand if you don't want to move forward. Have a nice weekend. By Monday afternoon, Lisa signed exclamation point emails with smiley faces from this woman, right? She wanted a place to project her stuff.
Yeah.
And didn't have to entangle in that.
Good for you. Yeah.
Right? So it's every day you have a choice. All day you have a choice.
Interesting. So you got to manage those choices all day. Wow. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but Erin, such a treat. A lot of fun talking about this. I feel like I definitely have a lot of work to do, but this has been a great conversation. I appreciate everyone tuning in. You can follow us at coffeewithken.com. We're on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play. And next week, we are doing a conversation on fighting hate and the rise of extremism. So that'll be on November 2nd. So until then, have a great one, Erin. Good to see you.
You too. Thanks, Ken.
Appreciate it.